hi everyone. In today's episode, I have Ben Smith from Breakaway Data, and I don't like to introduce my guest. So, Ben, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ben Smith. I'm head of international sport at Breakaway Data. I've been there for nearly a couple of years. Put really simply, what we help athletes do is access and control their performance data. So it's a new area with some pretty interesting stuff that hopefully we'll get into shortly.
First of all, Ben, it's really interesting to hear your story before Breakaway Data, and we've talked with you before the recording, and you've told me the crazy way you went through and the huge, experience you have. Share it with people.
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky to join professional sport at a time where there was huge growth going on. So I was doing my masters at a university in London called Brunel University, and it was actually in sports psychology. Sports psychology it's a fantastic profession, but certainly at the time there weren't many jobs, and so very good practical advice that one of the lecturers said was, look, you better get some secondary skills. So I quite quickly went, okay, cool. Can do that. So I started to do what was brand new at the time, which was performance analysis, and I spent a couple of years working at Fulham Football Club alongside my masters, doing what I considered fairly common sense stuff. Because when things start out in a new industry, you don't have to do anything that is groundbreaking. You just have to kind of do the basics, and because it's new, you can have a really high impact. And so the work we were doing at Fulham was really useful. My masters was focusing on something called role clarity, which is a really academic term, but essentially, do people know what they're supposed to do in a team? And video is a great way of sitting down with people, reviewing and helping tactical exploration and kind of education. So we kind of set up a program around that sort of stuff that worked well. And then when the coach I worked with at Fulham Football Club, who was a coach called Paul Clement, he got headhunted to move over to Chelsea, and I was asked to move over with him. So I started my first proper job really at Chelsea Football Club, which is great. Huge opportunity. Very fortunate, particularly compared to people starting out now. We've got so many different rungs to kind of get through to get their first opportunity. So I started, what was it? I think it was about 2008 or 2007 maybe, at Chelsea. Still when Jose Mourinho was in post in his first time around. And I worked at Chelsea for 16 years through three major iterations of roles. The first was in performance analysis. And as I said, brand new, set up a department, kind of instilled a program across 12 different teams, and just built a whole competence within the club, which was great. Really, really exciting time to be at Chelsea, and also a really great time to be introducing a whole new support program. So I did that for a little while, and then the next phase of work at Chelsea was around systems and technology. So again, as professional sport continued to kind of roar along with new areas, new technologies, new things coming in about how to improve, there's a real kind of like, okay, this is an important area. We haven't got anyone who looks after this. We don't want IT to do it. How we fulfill that? And because I was working in technology and performance analysis, I was more qualified than anyone else. By no means an expert, but good enough from Chelsea. So I spent 5-6 years then working across system technology and kind of coming up with strategic approaches about why we would use certain technologies, overseeing the programs, partnerships, and kind of trying to help the club make better use of data and technology, which is a huge scope, and certainly one that was quite a lot more complicated than performance analysis. But also really enjoyable. And then lastly, when the club was starting to mature a little bit, and we won the Champions League, we were consistently successful at the level we'd aspired to for quite a while. The questions really were around, how do you consolidate that? How do you stay really good for quite a long time? And so there are two ways. You can either keep employing more people. You've got 150, let's get another 100 people, let's keep packing the stands, as it were, with more expertise in new areas. But the club didn't really want to do that, because you get diminishing returns. Like, you get 2 more experts in, but then it's complicated to manage 2 more people. And so each new person you get in adds quite a big level of complexity and communication, HR, all that sort of stuff, and makes it harder for people to have person-to-person relationships because there's just too many people everywhere. So if you're not going to employ more people, then you need to build effective partnerships with external knowledge. And that is universities, applied companies, it's programs going on. It's how do we take everything out there and use it more effectively in a football club. So I was head of research innovation, which was largely around how did the club solve some of its existing problems by connecting with external partners. So that was heads of department and people within the club understanding what they were trying to do and not having time to do it, and just they're busy people. You work in a million miles an hour trying to do your day-to-day job, so you've got a great idea about what you want to do, but it's too much work additionally to what you're trying to do. So often you might try and start it, but you struggle to deliver the project effectively. And so my job and the guys I work with was really around to do a lot of that heavy lifting. How would we help the stakeholder define what they're trying to do, work with them to improve it to the best possible way, and then we would go away and do a lot of that manual work, creating the program, creating the solution, whatever it is, up to a point. The stakeholder's still involved, but at an executive level. Speak to them once every week, 2 weeks, month, whatever it is. Until that program is 90% done, or the process, then you can hand it back to them and they can just finish off the implementation or the development or whatever it is, so that they're much closer to something that's useful to them, that's going to make a difference. And so we would do a lot of that work to help new projects actually take off within the club. And then a second way of, I suppose, looking at new areas was really around being externally facing. You see what's going on in different industries, in your industry, competitors, anything out there, and understanding would those things be useful in solving some of our problems. So it's a very fortunate position where you get to kind of nasal gaze a little bit and kind of look around and just go, what's cool? What's exciting? What's going on in high performance places, independent of sport, that might be useful for us to solve our problems. And so you have to have a good understanding of what the key strategic priorities are, but then you cherry pick what are great processes, ideas, or anything that the club can use to start to address some of these challenges in a way that your sport or sport in general has never done before.
Okay, yeah, so it sounds really interesting. I'm pretty sure for people who are listening like us, they might be really, really interested in actual example of, let's say, what you did in Chelsea when you took something from a different, area of the world of anything, and basically you took it and applied it to sports. It's really interesting for anyone listening to hear.
Yeah, no problem. So, what was it? I guess in about 2018, the club, the academy in this instance, had been running a full-time school for about 7 years. So as part of the, it was actually just before the Triple P, but part of the whole professionalisation of youth in English football meant that more and more of the top clubs started having full-time education programs. So if you start full-time education at 13, 14, you get the players on site full-time. So essentially you can have a lot more contact time, a lot more development, and you can have some tremendous opportunities to accelerate the progress of those players. So the academy had a school for a while, but I don't know if it's the same for your audience, but certainly in British football, education historically has not been well regarded. It's if you want to be an elite sports person, education is something you do on the side until you become elite, and the sooner you can get past it, the better. And so that consequently means that players don't typically engage with it very well. It's not a great use of their time. It's just not a good addition. Everyone keeps describing it as a fallback. If you don't make it, you've got to have education. I think that's a real failure on the way to describe education. It's not appropriate either, because education is actually, it's an opportunity to develop elite habits that align with what you're trying to do in football, and in certain it's a better opportunity to develop elite habits than it is on the training field. And so we wanted to create an educational environment that helped develop the best footballers in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That you can't just pay lip service of like, oh, we'll get some teachers, we'll teach them some subjects, and we'll just kind of do what everyone does, because we'd done that and it didn't work. And so we decided, okay, well, if we're going to sort of redefine what the school process should look like, where should we get our ideas from? How do you create an elite sporting school when there's no blueprint? There's no idea like just do it like this, because we'd done what other clubs had done before. So we kind of asked ourselves, what's the best education structure in the world? So we looked across lots of different nations more than anything else, and quite quickly drew to the Finnish education system. So in Finland, they have tremendous education. I mean, throughout the whole of Scandinavia and Norway and Sweden, but within Scandinavia, there's a really different approach to education in terms of teachers are valued in the same way that doctors are. It's not that in the UK a teacher it's a great profession, but it's paid poorly. It's not kind of the same social standing as solicitor, doctor, surgeon.
Yeah.
Things in the countries we were looking in, we're talking a teacher is one of the top professions you can be. You have to have done master's degrees, you're paid properly, and it's a really important part of society. So okay, great. Those are important markers. Academic achievement's really, really high. It was a really positive process, and I suppose much of the quality of the people and what they go on to achieve is reflected from their education system. So it's like, great, those are all kind of foundational things that we want at Chelsea. It'll be expressed a little bit differently, but we want education to be that important to our players. So we did a 3-month deep dive into, okay, what makes up these education systems? Basically comes down to the highest quality teachers, incredible content. And so it's very applied learning, relevant applied learning. You kind of go through all these different things that what makes that education system so good. You kind of then do a full analysis of what those characteristics are. And then go, okay, well, we've got, I think it was 5 key things, and go, what would those 5 things look like in an elite football club? They're not going to look the same as they do in kind of Finnish education. However, how would they be expressed? So if you're looking about what do the best teachers look like, okay, that's easy, simple enough. You're getting people who are highly skilled with great sort of soft skills as well. So they're able to teach really effectively, and that's actually the most important thing about a school. You get the best teachers. Everything else is important, but the best teachers is the most important. And then you go, okay, well, we want small class sizes, so we can have 5 to 8 children per class, and how do we structure all that? How do we make it flexible so that you can have training whenever it needs to be and it can move whenever it should move? If someone's called up to train with the first team, you don't want to say, sorry, they've got a maths class. You go, come out of maths right now, go and train with the first team, and then you'll do catch up in maths later. And so you have a flexibility within all your teaching structures so that players can move and get opportunities within the football side without compromising their education. So you do all that sort of stuff. You go, okay, how do we make it relevant to footballers? They're not enjoying algebra. They don't get it. They don't like physics. And they'll go, this is not useful for me as a footballer. But if you can start to analyse the teaching curriculum, and then go, okay, how do we make this relevant to footballers? How do we showcase what skills will be fundamental for them as footballers, not as footballers? So you go through the process of kind of understanding how to make it more interesting, how to make it more relevant, how to show these players that education is not the thing that happens when you fail. It's one of the things that will help you succeed, because these players are hugely committed to being first team footballers, and they will do almost anything that will help them on that pathway to success. but they just hadn't seen how the school, how academic education was a part of that pathway to success. Restructuring, redefining, and delivering more value, and then communicating that differently, you can completely change the proposition around education, which is actually this is a really fundamental part of how you succeed, and then your players start engaging with it completely differently, and it became a very strong part of our development program. And there's still the same complaints about school lessons and stuff, but there was a huge cultural shift in the value of education and why that was important, not just for the players, but also within practitioners, coaching staff, within the whole organisation. The people who had not necessarily had an education that was important in their development started to see how it was important for the players. And so that was an example of taking a completely abstract concept to sports development, and then how, if you're going to do things really well, how you can actually come up with a completely bespoke organisation relevant program that allows your players to develop in a way that I don't think any of the competitors at the time had, and certainly I've not seen anything since, because it's very expensive to do this, don't be wrong. So it is the luxury of really well-resourced clubs to do that, but it also takes a huge amount of work to do that process. And there was the ambition and the resources to do that at Chelsea across countless areas. That's just one example of where you went, okay, well, if we're going to create a school and an education process that has never been done before in football, what should it look like? And so you go through all of this process to create something that was certainly a really good solution for Chelsea. It wouldn't necessarily be a good solution for anyone else, because you need to work out how all of those things should fit every environment. Some clubs may have a similar style of solution. Some would want something completely different. But that ability to really evaluate it and go, this is what elite looks like here in this environment was a great privilege.
To you, Ben, and to be honest, that's the things I never thought about that actually the sport clubs are doing. And I'm pretty sure for everyone who is listening, they got a ton of value from what you said, and just it is really interesting to understand what's actually happening behind the sports innovation and taking these approaches. And that's a huge strategic project, and applying it, that's just awesome to do.
There's countless areas of really good inspiration out there across army, all combat services, emergency medical, teaching, education. They have so many things in common with sport, even though the final expression is quite different. Playing in a game of football is different from saving people in an ambulance, or however, there's a lot of commonalities. And when you start understanding why people do what they do, you can really start to go, that's really clever. Like, I love the way you do that and that and that. And actually, I'm going to try and take some learnings from here and find a different way of applying them in our environment. And you start to really squeeze and develop things and create things that have never been done before, because you're taking great ideas from other high performance people and organizations, and then applying them for the first time in your organization.
That's Ben, again, like I said, interesting, but I also want to head to, let's say we talk about your previous experience, right, what you did, but I want to transfer a little bit to where you now, and to talk about actually breakaway data, because it's really interesting concept as well. And I see everywhere you are working, it's just not a general, repeatable job. It's just something huge and new. So tell us about what you guys do right now.
Sure. So what we do is we help athletes, teams and leagues aggregate performance data. So I'll unpack each of those things so people understand it in simple language. An athlete, when they perform in whatever sport they're doing, they produce information from the match environment, In football terms, that may well be event data, tracking data, things that are created around what's happened in a game situation. You've got training data, which may well be loading and GPS data, physical strength testing, recovery data, all that kind of stuff. That's all created around an athlete. You've got medical data, so medical records, when a player has injuries, there's notes, there's scans, there's all that sort of stuff going on. And then the last source of data is personal wearables. So the stuff that you and I wear, and Aura, Whoop, Apple, Garmin, all that sort of stuff. Those data sources are being created around an athlete from a club, from a national team, and more from private consultants. Rarely, if ever, do the athletes get that information. So they kind of move from environment to environment, and each of them creates information whilst they're in that environment, and then they move somewhere else, and the information is siloed, so it sits there. In a good organisation, they are better at sharing within the organisation, but it's really hard to share across organisations. And so if you're an athlete moving from club to national team, it's well documented the injury risk actually increases as you go from one to the other. There's lots of different reasons why. However, having your data is a great way of minimising that risk. So what you do is a player doesn't need to be engaged with that data, but if they control their data, they can automatically share their club data with their national team. They can make their data work for them so that the professionals see what's going on in other environments, and then you can give them evidence-based training rather than taking the best guess of, I guess he's been working quite hard in the club environment, so we'll take it easy the first couple of days. I think elite performance now is there's a much higher standard than just taking a best guess at what's possible. It should be a proper evidence-based understanding of why an athlete should have high, medium, low, or whatever it is, and you should have a full oversight of that to see what condition an athlete's coming in, so they're not undertrained, you're not minimising the opportunity for certain types of work, but equally you're not overtrained and increasing injury risk. And that data collection from an athlete and then automatically sharing is what we're doing. We're allowing an athlete to create a performance passport for the entire span of their career. So if they start at 17 and they're in an academy in one club, and then they change and go to another, and then they go to another club in a different country, their data is theirs, and it builds and grows and moves with them as they move from environment to environment. And they can choose to engage with it if they want. I think it's not difficult to understand, even though in football there's not a huge pent-up demand yet for people kind of wanting to look at their data. But if you think of society, we all start to collect it. Certainly, I'm a tech person. I like getting my data, my new smart ring, and I like starting to understand what's going on and taking a bit more control of what I'm trying to do and why. So sport is absolutely moving in that direction. So athletes in a period of time, to be determined, probably through discussion and all that sort of stuff, but in a period of time, athletes will be much more engaged in what their data is telling them, and they will have a stronger voice in what they think should be done. So they'll be a little less passive about, we just turn up and do whatever, and it'll be more of an open discussion about how involved they are in that, or how involved they want to be, and the data's aspect of that. It doesn't rule everything in terms of the data says this, so it means you've got to do that. What it does is it provides a base level understanding of where you're at, and therefore allows good conversations with practitioners, with coaches, where people are interested and have a level of understanding that helps them, I suppose, come into a conversation more informed or have a clearer opinion of what they think should be done.
Okay, yeah, that's the awesome concepts, like you said. And I'm curious, who is the main people or the stakeholders who are interested in this at this moment?
Yeah, so we work with 4 major leagues where they've decided that actually this is something that should happen across the entire league. So every athlete is invited onto a program to access and control their data. And one of those is one of the biggest leagues in the entire world. And so this isn't sort of small innovation leagues in sports you've never heard of. This is right to the very, very top of sport. And in that case, the biggest challenge is access to medical data. So athletes in that environment, they spend quite a lot of time in the off season, and they see their own private consultants, they have their own private teams, and so players having the ability to have full access to all of the medical records and the ability to share them with their own people is a significant advantage in that sport. And therefore the league said, no, we want to pay for this to be across all of our athletes in the entire league. And there's a use case that is, I suppose, compelling in that sport, but also, you start to bring in match data, you start to bring in other data sources that are useful, but perhaps not the magic bullet, whereas in that sport, medical data is. In the NWSL, the American Women's Football League, the transfer of loading data was kind of one of their key things. So we work across the league, and the US Women's National Team struggled to get the loading data of their national team players from the club environment. They made a nice.
The loading data. What's loading data?
So the GPS, the players
Okay,
have the GPS devices in here. So loading data is how hard they've been working day in, day out. And so you take a periodized view of what they need to do in relation to being at the optimum for a game day. So the clubs, there was a range of responses to the US soccer, which some of them I'm interested and let's go. Some of them I'm interested and then don't find time to do it, and others don't respond. So you can't build a systematic sharing process with only half the clubs or a third of the clubs involved. So they came to us and we unlocked that so that the entire league is now accessing all their data, sharing their data, and so the national team there or any other national team can see the data from those players, and you can start to understand before they come into a camp environment, okay, what state are they in? How do we best manage them here? And equally, how do we share the data back to the clubs so that when they go back to the club after, let's say 5 weeks away the World Cup, actually that club has a really good understanding of the physical conditioning of that player and can make the best use of that in terms of performance development, but also managing any potential injury risk.
Interesting. You are talking about a lot of different data points, right? And different, data sets. And how do you, like in practice, how do you store all of this data? How do you help players own this data? Do you have an app and database, or how does it work?
Yeah, so there's two parts to it. So every player who signs up with us, and it's completely free for players. We don't charge athletes. Any player that signs up with us has their own individual database. So as I understand it, across all of the sports organisations, they're team based. If you think of an AMS, Kitman Labs, Smarter Base, great companies do a fantastic job, but they have a team structure, and the software is based around the team, and if you leave, you're out the team. We have an individual player structure, so it doesn't matter what environment you're in, it's always your database, and everything is then kind of added into it from wherever it's created. So that's the bank principle. It's the ability for an athlete to store that data forever, and it is stored in there if and when they want to have it, if they want to share it, if they need it post-career because they've got certain brain injuries, or they have reoccurring ACL injuries, whatever it is. They've got all of their records that they can then use to get value from. The second element of that is the ability to share it, as we talked about, and then the third part is we have an app which an athlete can download, and they can choose to visualize any or all parts of their data. In reality, we would recommend that's 2, maybe 3 things. In football terms, that might be an athlete is interested in their sleep data they get from the Oura Ring. It might be their training loads they're getting from the GPS devices, and some match data. They really don't want to look at more than that every day because it's just way too much information. The rest of it is all stored, but they're in their app, they've customized it so they only see the things that are relevant and interesting to them, the things they're probably talking to their sports scientist about, the things they've set some goals around and they're trying to improve on, and that data comes in every day and helps them understand where they're at in relation to the things they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's interesting. And in terms of talking about stakeholders and like how do you explain to the leagues the value of what you do and why it's important? Like if I would be a league, like why would I pay for this service?
Yeah, so there's two parts to it. I mean, if a league is unaware of this, it will not be one conversation that helps them understand why this is important. The conversation that helps a league go, yeah, we want to do it, is where they've already thought about this, they've already realized the risks and the opportunities. And when I talk about risks, I mean GDPR and GDPR equivalent legal structure means that any of these athletes are allowed this data. You know, this isn't a league choosing to be nice to their athletes and going, oh, here's your data. An athlete has the legal structures to be able to say, that is my personal data, I would like to access it. And the league then, they have an obligation legally to do that. Otherwise, there's some pretty strict laws and big fines in place. In GDPR, it's 3% of turnover. So if you're a big football club, we're talking 15-20 million pounds for your failure to comply. So that's a pretty big headline grabbing thing that the organisations mostly are aware of and go, okay, when an athlete requests their data, we know we've got to give it to them. We don't have a way of giving it to them though. It's a real pain in the ass. So I remember at Chelsea we did a process where we kind of worked out how long would it take if an athlete came and asked for their data. And at the time, it was about 14 working days. That's how long it would take us to get this together, to give the data to an athlete we know we have to do. That is a huge drain of resource. In the league that I was telling you about in America, and I can't name them because they've asked not to be, but they were having so many player requests for their medical data that they had worked out how much time they were spending giving the players this data. So having a proactive solution that automatically shares the data with players saves them all of that resource, as well as making them happy and helping them. And so on a simple time basis, it was like, we've got to have a solution here that isn't a person that's constantly finding files and trying to share them. And our mechanism is really clean and easy. It's an app, and so people know how to use apps. The information is automatically shared, and so you get rid of that headache from a legal point of view, which is it's very important because I think that is a big driver. I'm an optimist. I love opportunities. I prefer to look at our solution in terms of what you can do when you start to share information with players. Forget the fact that you have to. If you choose to share information with players, you create a level of transparency, trust. You change the culture of what it means, or you can change the culture of what it means to have high performance goals. I think I've got a huge amount of respect for a number of women's sports that have been able to create a really inclusive culture with their athletes around performance, where those athletes are hugely involved in terms of leadership groups, in terms of internal monitoring, of creating this culture where they really buy into what elite performance looks like and what you need to compromise and give for the whole organisation to achieve that. And I think that's achieved. I don't think it's women specific. I think that's available for any organisation that wants to create that culture. And here is a tool, and it's only a tool, but here's a tool that supports that approach and helps you, as a minimum, give transparency and honesty, but as an opportunity, you can connect with players and you can start to get them highly engaged, start to get them clear idea of what they want to do, how they want to contribute. Where's the things that I can give to this objective, rather than just sitting there and being told what to do.
Yeah, and I can say, when the time goes on, the clubs will be more aware of this problem. And do you guys do kind of, I don't know, trainings, or are you trying to bring up the problem on the service so the clubs understand that it's important?
Well, it's a delicate balance, really, because our
Mm-hmm.
job isn't to tell organisations how to develop their performance culture.
Mm-hmm.
And if you start telling senior leaders what they should be doing, it generally doesn't go very well. However,
Yeah.
our conversations along this line are typically with people who have a clear idea of what they're trying
Mm-hmm.
to do, but perhaps don't have the right sets of tools to be able to do it. There are many, chief of medicals in federations and in clubs that have wanted to share data with players for quite a long
Mm-hmm.
time. It's been an objective for them. They just haven't been able to. There hasn't been
Mm-hmm.
a good mechanism to do this. So we provide a solution that's like, great, I've wanted to do that for ages. I'd love to work with you. And it's similar from a high performance point of view in terms of the culture. It's probably those organisations that are trying to find ways of achieving that see us as an opportunity rather than us going to organisations saying, by the way, you could get really engaged players here. If they're not already exploring that, they're probably not ready to use a tool like ours in that way.
Yeah, I understand. So, and how do you say, how do you rate the market right now? Is it ready for your solution? What the percentages of the sport team is ready for this?
Yeah, I mean, it's different sport by sport. So North America is more sophisticated in terms of data. They understand some of the risks and generally the opportunities, and
Mm-hmm.
so North American market is quicker to move in. European football is interesting because it's quite diverse. There's a strong indication from individual athletes and consultants and some NGBs and sort of governance level organisations that they're ready for this. Clubs seem to be slightly slower, mainly because they're really busy. There's a huge amount going on, and until something becomes an urgent priority, they're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's cool, but like I've got loads of stuff I need to do, so now we'll just talk to you again in 6 months. So I foresee quite a difficult position for clubs that because they're waiting for something to become urgent, it will have to become urgent, as in players will have to make legal requests. Governance organisations will say, this is happening across football and you need to adapt for clubs to come en masse. There are obviously individual clubs we work with now who are really progressive and are thinking ahead. But if you're talking about widespread across the whole of football, I think it will be a bumpy transition because I'm not thinking about how to manage this quite as well as in other sports or other areas of the world. I reference the Australian sports ecosystem because it was nearly 3 years ago they published research papers around the strategic risks of player
Mm-hmm.
access to data. They didn't know what the answers were, but they were systematically going, this is really important and we should be thinking about this. I think that the best organisations are constantly trying to work out what are those critical things that they can do, that they have
Mm-hmm.
to do, and then trying to find a balance between, I'm biased obviously, I want every club to do this right,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but equally, I do respect and understand that they have a big list of very important things they're trying to do. And so what I'm doing now in this conversation and just more
Mm-hmm.
generally is helping clubs understand the transformational process that's happening. It's completely independent of Breakaway, but we're very happy to be helping this happen, which is athletes and individuals are getting their data. They're getting used to it. Athletes are starting to understand the performance value and probably in time the commercial value of
Mm-hmm.
accessing their data and of using their legal rights. And clubs are going to have to adjust to that. And the clubs that get the most value from this are going to be the early adopters and that find out how to structure this in a way that suits their objectives rather than being dragged into it kicking and screaming where they have to do it legally, but they've lost control over the performance narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Players are frustrated that the clubs are choosing not to share data willingly, and you're in a position of distrust and forcing clubs to do X, Y, and Z, rather than saying, "Oh no, we want to help you. We want to kind of lean in and do this collectively together." So I think it'll be interesting to see how quickly that culture shifts. In some of the big US sports that we work with now, I expect what we're doing there to be seen by other athletes and go, why can they have their
Mm-hmm.
data in their sport? Why do they get all the medical records if you play that sport but not our sport?
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. Particularly think of European football, it's a well-resourced sport, and for athletes not to be able to have their medical records seems mental.
As I said, the new generation of athletes are developing, and, when they are starting to see, more digital generation of athletes, they will understand the value of data. And obviously, all of them have smartphones right now, iPhones, and everyone wants to be like digitalized. And that's where I think the problems for those who are not thinking about the approach you said will come
Yeah.
up when the new generations will grow.
And if you think of, I don't know if you've used a smart ring before. I like Aura, I like Samsung. Both of them give you like an energy score, a sleep score, essentially like a rolled up number of how well you're doing that day based on the things that are important. That's the opportunity for all athletes across all their information,
Mm-hmm.
for an ability to kind of measure all of the things that are important in your sport and for you to get a one of one, as in this is just on you. It isn't like everyone across the team. This is how well you're doing
Mm-hmm.
your journey to be at your best in all the things that you can control and measure. There's a really exciting opportunity to offer insights that
Mm-hmm.
clubs are getting nowhere near at the moment. And that's not to
Mm-hmm.
say that Breakaway want to do all this independent of clubs. I
Mm-hmm.
think by far the best solution is to do it so that clubs have this ability to manage that development with
Mm-hmm.
players, and they can do that. However, clubs need to lean in and choose to do that. Otherwise, players will be able to do it independently because they will have the data. And if clubs aren't able to offer that individualization, the one-on-one support for players who want to know more about themselves,
Mm-hmm.
will find other means of doing it in exactly the same way that they've got now private coaches, private nutritionists, their own sports scientists. These are
Mm-hmm.
well-resourced individuals who want more individual focus
Mm-hmm.
on performance, and clubs have an opportunity to lean into this and to be part of it, but players will get it whether clubs offer it or not.
Okay, yeah, I completely agree, Ben. I usually do it for 30 minutes, but today we had a really interesting talk. I wanted to, end up our podcast by asking you a blitz questions. So the first one is, what is your favorite sport?
Yeah, I think that the time I spent in football just gives me a really strong affinity. I love so many different sports for many different reasons, but the amount of time I've spent committing my time and effort into football means that football's my number one.
All right, who's your favorite player then?
Well, that's a little bit harder because I have a huge bias from the Chelsea cohort that I worked
Mm-hmm.
with, and as individuals, as professionals, and as people. And so I have a huge amount of time for Mason Mount, who's at Manchester United, a tremendous individual as a person and a fantastic footballer. He's had a challenging 12 months in terms of injuries and kind of managing that process. But I
Mm-hmm.
strongly believe he's going to come back to proper elite form. Hopefully with his current club, and he'll
Mm-hmm.
be back on the world stage. But he's a player I love.
Okay. What is your favorite part of your job?
The ability to be curious about anything and everything. I've been very fortunate, as you pointed out, to work in industries and careers where you're kind of the first person that's done something. So
Mm-hmm.
there is no specific way that it has to be done because you haven't worked that out yet. And so I love learning about new things. I love experiencing new things. So having a role where I can go and explore things and that be part of what I'm supposed to do is hugely satisfying to me.
You share your creativity, right, to the world, and through this way you feel meaningful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like breaking new ground, and so the ability to create valuable solutions in whatever context you're in, but from completely new areas is always exciting.
Okay, Ben. All right, so we'll be finishing up a couple last questions. Where could our followers, follow your work?
Sure. So Breakaway, we're across all socials. I put stuff out on LinkedIn. I think over the next 12 months, you'll see more and more of these major leagues signing up. And so we'll just have more headline things to put out. We will always respect the privacy of certain leagues that don't want to publicize what they're doing for their players. From a data security point of view, they want to ensure player data is really locked up tight. However, if you look across our website, our socials, or my personal LinkedIn, you'll get all of the stuff that's going on, and you'll hopefully see a really good 12 to 24 months where the culture of the biggest sports really starts to be more inclusive, and some really exciting opportunities around athlete data.
Okay, and is there something you want to share at the end with our listeners? Maybe we forgot something.
Well, I think we've rightly focused in on the performance element of everything that is happening right now. However, it's not difficult to understand the commercial opportunities here. I think data is the new oil is an overused statement, and it's really blunt. However, it gets across the point the value of your data. And so as individuals, and athletes are of really high interest and really high value, as they get access to their data universally, you're going to see some really cool fan engagement, commercial activity, that people start telling brilliant performance stories with their data that will help us collectively as a fan audience start to engage with individual athletes, teams and leagues in new ways that helps you get a deeper connection with that sport. So it's not just about how do I make more money, but how do you help that sport grow in a way that makes it more exciting. Something amazing on telly, all of a sudden there's a really deep data dive into the things that's been going on that week, how that compares to everything else going on. How do you tell a really interesting story about a critical moment that's just happened? And I think that stuff's really exciting, and we haven't really touched on it at all, but that's part of the future vision of what will happen for athletes, teams and leagues who start to control and manage this data.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought about this as well. Like the different approaches you could take to use this data and create like almost anything from it. It just sounds inspiring.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. You can see little things out there now where they're playing around with athlete heart rates, but there's such a big array. You just need a good storyteller. You need an ability to use data in a way that is interesting, that we as fans care about. Tell me something that I don't want to know something that's boring. I want to know something that helps me understand why that's so impressive. I want to be blown away, basically.
All right, yeah, Ben, thank you so much for, sharing what you actually did in Chelsea and what you do in Breakaway Data. For me, it was really, personally, I've learned a lot from you, and I think everyone who is listening to us is gonna go home today and just think about what we've talked. And yeah, thank you for joining, and it was great to have you.
No problem at all. Any of your listeners, feel free to follow us, drop us a line, get involved. Always happy to share and engage on this stuff.